You know the loudest thing in my new apartment? The silence. It's not just quiet, man, it's empty. For 5 years, my world was a symphony of Sophie's needs. The constant ping of her work emails at midnight, the frantic energy before one of her important presentations, even the way she'd talk at me while scrolling through her phone. I got so used to that hum, I think I mistook it for my own heartbeat. I followed that sound across 3 cities, convinced myself her dream was our dream. But with every packed box, I left a piece of myself behind until I was just an accessory that moved with the furniture. Now all that noise is gone, and this quiet, it isn't peaceful yet. It's heavy, it's the sound of a 5-year hole where my own life was supposed to be. I'm out, I'm free, but all that's left in here is me and the goddamn echoes. 5 years ago, things were noisy, but in a way that felt like life itself. I was in Austin. Man, if you know Austin, you know the music scene is its lifeblood. It's not just a genre. It's the air you breathe. I wasn't a rock star chasing a record deal, but I was something just as vital. I was a sound engineer at a small but legendary studio, Fader 4, a place with worn-out Persian rugs, walls stained with coffee and ambition, and posters of obscure bands that had made it big, their signatures scrawled over peeling corners. My life was a comfortable, beautiful chaos. It was the thrill of a late-night mixing session, headphones clamped on, isolating the warmth of a bass guitar and making it sit perfectly against a raw vocal track. It was the satisfaction of seeing a band listen back to their song, their eyes lighting up because you'd captured the exact sound they'd only heard in their heads. My friends were the guys in those bands. Dave, our lanky drummer who could talk for an hour about the resonant frequency of a snare drum, a couple of others. We weren't just friends, we were a tribe. We had our own language, a shorthand built on shared chords, inside jokes about gigs where the power went out, and a weekly ritual of 2 a.m. tacos from a food truck that knew our orders by heart. My bank account was never overflowing, but my life was. I had a purpose I could feel in my bones, a tangible thing I was building with my own hands. Then I met Sophie. She was like a lightning strike in my hazy, analog world. She was at a showcase where one of my bands was playing, not for the music, but for networking. She worked in marketing for some tech startup and talked about synergy, market penetration, and scaling with a fiery passion I usually reserved for vintage amplifiers. She was ambitious in a way that felt adult, important. She looked at my world, my studio, my passion, and she didn't just appreciate it. She immediately wanted to package it. "You're so incredibly talented, Ryan," she'd said on our first date, her eyes gleaming with an intensity that I mistook for pure admiration. "This is a brand. We just need to leverage it." I was so completely smitten. I heard "we" and my heart swelled. I didn't realize that for her, "we" was a business partnership where she was the CEO. She praised my ear, my skills, but what she really loved was the story of me, the cool, creative guy who could be part of her power couple narrative. Her success, with its clear promotions and salary bumps, started to feel more concrete than my own. Her ambition became my mission. I started to see my own worth through her eyes, and slowly I began to believe that the most important thing I could build wasn't a perfect mix, but a supportive platform for her meteoric rise. I didn't realize I was slowly tying the anchor of my identity to her ship, believing that wherever she sailed, I'd be right there on the captain's deck with her. I was so damn wrong. I was just becoming part of the cargo. The first move was to Chicago. Sophie landed a promotion, a big one, and she sold it to me with the skill of a master marketer. "Think of it, Rye," she'd said, her eyes wide with manufactured shared excitement. "A real city, this isn't just the next step for me, it's for us. Imagine the connections, the culture." When I hesitated, mentioning my studio and my friends, she'd waved it away with a perfectly manicured hand. "Babe, your talent is portable. A good sound engineer can work anywhere. This is our chance to build a real future." I let myself be convinced because my value was so tangled up in her success by then. Her win felt like my win, a shared victory. So I packed up my life, reassuring my bandmates that I'd be back for visits, that we'd collaborate remotely. I was lying to them and to myself. Chicago was a cold shock, and I don't just mean the 6 months of winter. The music scene there was a fortress. It wasn't a community. It was a cutthroat competition. The laid-back, collaborative spirit of Austin was gone, replaced by a hustle that felt sharp and unwelcoming. I remember emailing the owner of a studio I'd admired from afar, pouring my heart out about my experience and passion. The reply, which came a week later, was a single, sterile line from an assistant. Please submit your professional portfolio and a list of recent commercial clients for consideration. I had a portfolio of heart, of indie rock and folk singers, not jingles for car dealerships. At Sophie's sleek, minimalist work events, I became a ghost. I was Sophie's boyfriend, a pleasant, smiling accessory. When asked what I did, I'd start to explain sound engineering, only to watch their eyes glaze over before they'd spot someone more important over my shoulder. Less than 2 years later, it happened again. This time, Seattle. A tech giant had poached her, offering a title and a salary that seemed like a typo. She announced it over a celebratory dinner she'd arranged without telling me the reason. "We're moving to Seattle," she declared, raising her champagne flute. The "we" was no longer a proposal, it was a royal decree. When I finally found my voice and brought up my complete lack of a career, her patience, already worn thin, snapped. "Ryan, honestly," she said, her voice sharp and devoid of its usual warmth, "your sound thing is a great hobby, but this is my career, a real one. You just need to find a new project to keep you busy." A project, like I was a bored housewife in need of a pottery class. In Seattle, I didn't even try to find a studio. The fight had gone out of me. The city felt like it was made of glass and code, and I was just a ghost haunting the edges of her shiny new life. I became her support system, her valet. I made sure her dry cleaning was picked up, that the fridge was stocked with her favorite imported sparkling water, that I was ready with a glass of wine when she came home stressed. She'd buy me expensive, neutral-colored sweaters to wear to her corporate parties, coaching me on the names of VPs I needed to impress. "Just be charming," she'd whisper, as if charming was a job I could clock in for. "And maybe don't lead with the 'I used to be in a band' thing, it sounds a little small time." She was actively curating my past, editing my identity to fit her brand. And the scariest part, I let her. Playing the part felt easier than looking in the mirror and asking the hollowed-out stranger staring back what the hell had happened to him. The scariest part about losing yourself is that it doesn't happen all at once. It's not a sudden event. It's a slow fade, like a photograph left out in the sun, the colors bleaching out pixel by pixel until you can barely recognize the face anymore. My friends were the first real color to go. In Chicago, I tried desperately to keep them. I'd schedule weekly video calls with Dave and the old crew from Austin. At first, it felt almost normal. We'd crack the same old jokes, talk about new gear. But soon, a gap started to form, an ocean of unshared experiences. They'd be buzzing about a new local band they were recording, a wild night at a familiar bar, and I'd have nothing to offer in return. My stories were all secondhand, filtered through Sophie's world. Sophie's team hit their quarterly target, I'd say, and the words would just hang there in the digital space between us, hollow and meaningless. I could literally see the pity in their eyes, the awkward pause before one of them would politely say, "That's awesome, man." Good for her. I could feel them trying to include me, but I was becoming a stranger living in a foreign land. I didn't know the new bartender's name, hadn't heard the new songs, hadn't been there. The calls got shorter. "Hey man, gotta run, band practice," Dave would say, and I could hear the relief in his voice. It wasn't his fault. How long can you talk to a ghost about a life he no longer lives? The calls became monthly, then sporadic texts, then just a happy birthday on a social media wall, lost among the dozens from Sophie's colleagues who barely knew me. By the time we got to Seattle, I had accepted my new reality. I didn't have friends of my own anymore. My entire social circle was an extension of Sophie's. I was the plus one, the designated driver, the guy who was good at making small talk with the spouses of her colleagues. I knew intricate details about their stock options, their upcoming trips to Bali, their kids' private school applications. But they knew nothing about me beyond the curated, Sophie-approved talking points. I was Ryan, the guy who used to be in music and was now exploring his options. It was a polite, soul-crushing euphemism for being completely and utterly lost. The real gut punch, the moment I truly understood the depth of my isolation, came on my 30th birthday. Sophie was on a business trip in London. She'd left a gift, an obscenely expensive watch, on the kitchen counter with a note full of corporate speak about investing in us. I sat there all day in our beautiful, sterile apartment overlooking the water, holding my phone. I scrolled through my contacts, hundreds of names, and I realized with a cold, sickening clarity that there was not a single person in this entire city I could call up and ask to just go for a beer. Not one. Every connection was through her. My entire existence was a satellite orbiting planet Sophie, and without her in the immediate vicinity, I was just a hunk of metal floating in the dark. That silence, the one I'm living in now, it was born in that apartment. It was the sound of my own social universe collapsing into a black hole. The final straw wasn't a fight. It was a party, her party, of course. Sophie had just been promoted again, this time to some director-level position with a title so long it sounded like a parody. To celebrate, she threw a party in our Seattle apartment, the one with the floor-to-ceiling windows and the view that cost more than my entire Austin life. The place was packed with her people. Sleek, ambitious tech elites in expensive, minimalist clothing, all sipping artisanal gin and talking about burn rates and user acquisition. I felt like a prop. My role for the evening, as it had been for years, was to be the charming, supportive partner. I refilled glasses, laughed at jokes I didn't understand, and nodded along to conversations about things I couldn't care less about. I was making my way through the crowd with a tray of appetizers when a man cornered me by the balcony door. He was older, with silver hair and a watch that probably cost more than my first car. I recognized him as Julian, Sophie's new boss, the big shot she'd been trying to impress for months. He had this air of polite, predatory curiosity. "You must be Ryan," he said, his voice smooth as scotch. "Sophie talks about you constantly." I forced a smile. "That's me." He took a sip of his drink, his eyes scanning me from head to toe in a way that felt less like a greeting and more like an appraisal. "So," he said, leaning in slightly, his tone dripping with condescension disguised as interest. "What is it that you do?" The question hung in the air, sucking all the oxygen out of my lungs. My mind went completely blank. What do I do? I used to be a sound engineer. I used to create things. I used to have a purpose. But what do I do now? I couldn't say I support Sophie because that sounded pathetic. I couldn't say I'm figuring things out because after 5 years that sounded like a failure. I just stood there, my mouth opening and closing like a fish, the tray of mini quiches suddenly feeling impossibly heavy. Just as the silence became unbearable, Sophie swooped in, a dazzling smile plastered on her face. She wrapped an arm around my waist, a gesture that looked affectionate but felt like a leash. "Oh, Julian, you found my secret weapon," she chirped, her voice a pitch too high. She squeezed my side. "Ryan is my rock. He's the one who keeps everything together so I can go out and conquer the world." Then she looked at Julian, her smile tightening just a fraction, and delivered the killing blow. "He's in an exploratory phase right now, finding his passion." Exploratory phase. The words hit me like a physical blow. It was the ultimate corporate euphemism for unemployed and lost. In that one dismissive, perfectly packaged phrase, she had summarized 5 years of my sacrifice, my lost identity, my silent screams, and presented it to her boss as a charming, quirky footnote in her own success story. Julian gave me a tight, knowing smile, the smile of a man who understood hierarchies, and nodded. "Ah, good for you," he said, before turning his attention back to Sophie. In that moment, surrounded by a room full of people, I had never felt more invisible or more utterly alone. Something inside me didn't just break, it turned to dust. The party ended. Or at least it did for me. I don't remember the rest of the night. I think I went into autopilot, smiling and clearing glasses until the last guest finally left. Sophie was buzzing, high on her success, replaying every conversation she'd had with Julian. I just nodded, the sound of her voice nothing more than a distant hum. The words exploratory phase were on a loop in my head, a flashing neon sign illuminating the wreckage of my life. I woke up the next morning before she did. The sun was just starting to rise over the water, painting the sky in shades of gray and pink. For the first time in years, my mind was completely clear. There was no anger, no resentment, not even sadness. There was just a profound, hollow calm. It was over. I knew it with the certainty of a law of physics. I didn't make a scene. I didn't pack boxes. What was there to pack? My clothes, a handful of books, and a laptop. My entire life fit into 2 duffel bags. My real life, the one with the studio gear and the band posters and the worn-out guitar picks, was still collecting dust in a storage unit in Austin. I found a piece of paper and a pen. I thought about writing a long, angry letter listing every sacrifice, every broken promise. But what was the point? She wouldn't understand. She'd just see it as an inconvenient emotional outburst that threatened her carefully constructed narrative. So I kept it simple. I wrote 6 words. I'm going to find my sound. I left the note on the kitchen counter, right next to the obscenely expensive watch she'd given me for my birthday. I took my keys, walked out of the apartment, and didn't look back. I didn't go to Austin. That city was a graveyard of who I used to be, and I wasn't ready to face those ghosts. I just drove south, ending up in Portland, a city I knew only by reputation. I spent the first week in a cheap motel, just breathing. Then, with the last of the money from our old joint account that I felt entitled to, I found a small, dingy 1-room apartment. The day I moved in, I was walking around, exploring the neighborhood when I passed a pawn shop. In the window, dusty and forgotten, was an old acoustic guitar. A cheap Yamaha, strings rusted, wood scarred with nicks and scratches. It wasn't a professional instrument. It was a beginner's guitar. It was perfect. I bought it. That night, I sat on the floor of my empty apartment, the city lights a distant glow through the window. I tuned the old guitar, my fingers clumsy and stiff after years of disuse. I struck a chord. It was a simple G major, clunky and out of tune, but it was a sound. It was my sound. And for the first time in 5 years, I started to feel like I was finding myself again. It was a quiet, shaky feeling, a mix of profound sadness for the lost years and a tiny, flickering spark of hope for whatever came next. It was the sound of me starting over.